My name is Yvonne Merritt. I'm 68 years old. I was once a wife, a mother, a quiet backbone of a very loud legacy. I used to manage corporate finances for my late husband's firm, before it became a multi-billion-dollar empire with my son's name on every building. But none of that mattered the moment my son leaned in close and whispered, "Say hi to the sharks." Then he pushed me, and I fell, backwards, off the yacht, into the Atlantic. His wife stood behind him, still, silent, smiling. They didn't scream for help. They didn't throw a rope. They watched. And I sank. The water didn't feel like water. It felt like betrayal. Cold, thick, heavy. I opened my eyes as bubbles clawed their way past my face. The ocean blurred into memory. And suddenly, I wasn't drowning anymore. I was back on the edge of a small lake in Vermont. Ethan was 6. His legs trembled at the end of the diving board. "Mom, I'm scared," he said. I smiled, reached up from the water and promised, "I'll catch you. I'm always right here." He jumped. I caught him. Now, he's the one who pushed, and there was no one to catch me. They told me this was a birthday gift, a private family cruise to celebrate my life. It was Ethan's idea. He'd called me himself. No assistant, no formality, just his voice, warm, familiar, and deceptive. "Mom, we haven't spent time together since Dad passed," he'd said. "Cassandra and I want to honor you. Just us 3, like family used to be." I should have known better. The moment Cassandra hugged me on the dock, too tightly, too sweetly. The champagne, the curated music, the way they asked about the trust documents. It was all staged. Even the way Ethan filled my glass 3 times before noon. And I drank. Because part of me still hoped. Part of me believed the worst thing that could happen had already happened, losing Raymond. Turns out I was wrong. It gets worse when the ones still alive decide you're worth more dead. I hit the surface once, gasping, before the ocean swallowed me whole again, my body twisted, pulled down by the weight of a linen dress chosen for celebration. The color? Navy blue. Raymond's favorite. He used to say it made my eyes look like moonlight on water. I remember thinking, so this is how it ends. Not with age, not with illness, but with a lie wrapped in a yacht and a son who no longer sees you as human. But here's the thing. I didn't die. No one talks about what happens when the people who try to kill you think they've succeeded. There's a strange power in that, a kind of stillness. You're free to choose what comes next. By the time they got back home, back to my house, back to my money, back to my name, I was already there, sitting in Raymond's old armchair, alive, dry, and holding something they didn't expect. Not a weapon, not a threat. Just the truth and proof. The kind of proof that doesn't shout. It whispers, just like Ethan had, right before he shoved me into the sea. When I opened my eyes again, everything was beige. The walls, the curtains, even the steam rising from a chipped teacup beside my hand. I didn't recognize the ceiling. It sagged slightly in the corners. Water damage, maybe. There was a soft, ticking sound, steady, like a heartbeat made of wood. A wall clock, old, reliable, and the only thing speaking. I tried to sit up. My body groaned like I'd aged another 10 years overnight. The scent of ginger and salt still clung to me. Salt from the sea, ginger from the tea. Then I heard the scrape of a chair. A man, not young, not frail, stood by the window, pouring hot water into a kettle. He didn't flinch when I stirred. He didn't ask any questions. Just turned, gave a short nod, and said, "Sugar's on the table. You take it sweet?" I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't know what voice would come out if I tried. So I nodded. He placed the cup in front of me. The china was mismatched, a blue saucer beneath a green-rimmed cup. It reminded me of my first apartment after college. Nothing matched, but everything had history. The man sat across from me. His hands, veined and sun-worn, cradled his own mug like a habit. Still, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, not like I was a mystery, not like I was fragile, but like I was real, like I existed, here, now, soaked to the bone and barely breathing. And that was enough. A few minutes passed, or maybe more. Time moves differently when you're trying not to fall apart. I finally whispered, "You pulled me out?" He didn't blink. Found you clinging to a life ring half a mile out. The gulls were louder than you. A pause. Then, wasn't sure you were still breathing. I nodded slowly. I was. Another silence. Comfortable. Intolerable. "Name's Miles," he said finally. "Miles Delaney. Been living on this shore 32 years. Wife passed 6 years ago. Got a dog named Harper who only listens when she feels like it. You hungry?" I blinked. This man had rescued me from drowning, brought me into his home, dried my clothes, and all he offered me was tea and toast. No questions, no judgment, no demands. I stared down at the cup in my hand. "I'm Yvonne," I said softly. No last name, no titles, just Yvonne. And for the first time in decades, it felt like enough. He stood. "Kitchen's through there if you want to warm up. There's a towel on the radiator. Don't rush. Some folks take time to come back to themselves." Then he left the room. Just like that. No prying, no disbelief, only quiet. I stayed seated, watched the steam curl from the kettle like a ribbon of breath. It was strange. I'd spent my entire life surrounded by wealth, homes with voice-controlled lights, assistants who buzzed with false urgency, glasses that refilled with a nod. But none of that ever made me feel held. In this beige kitchen, with its mismatched mugs and silence thick as wool, I felt safer than I had in years. Outside, waves whispered against the shore like a memory I couldn't quite reach. Inside, the only sound was the clock. Talk, talk, talk. I realized then, not all rescues are loud. Some come with tea and quiet and no expectations. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, I sat alone at Miles's kitchen table, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts and a pair of corduroy pants he claimed had seen better decades. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the remote. The TV flickered on. A local news anchor, young and polished, appeared on screen. "In breaking news this morning," she said with practiced sorrow, "local philanthropist and widow Yvonne Merritt is presumed dead after a tragic boating accident off the Gulf Coast. Search and rescue efforts have concluded after a 24-hour window with no signs of life." My name. My face. My death. It was like watching someone else's funeral while your own heart still beat. A photo appeared. Me in a navy dress, pearls at my throat, eyes too tired behind the smile. It had been taken at a charity gala Ethan once begged me to attend for appearance's sake. I remember feeling invisible that night, even while everyone looked. Next came a video clip. Ethan stood before a row of microphones, wind tousling his hair just enough to make him look sympathetic. Cinematic, even. "My mother was a complicated woman," he began. "But she loved fiercely, even when it wasn't easy. We had our differences, but she was still my mom." He paused, lowering his head like a trained actor taking a beat. "She gave everything to our family. and I wish I had told her thank you more. I nearly laughed, but my throat was too dry. Then came Cassandra. Standing next to him, her voice breaking on cue. She was like a second mother to me, she said, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than Miles's entire kitchen. We were going to name our daughter after her. Their daughter who doesn't exist. They had told me they weren't ready for children, too busy building their future. But now, suddenly, I was the honored matriarch. The TV played soft, sentimental music over a montage of my life. Weddings, fundraisers, smiling beside Ethan as a boy. No mention of the business I built, the scholarships I started, the nights I stayed up nursing my dying husband while Ethan partied through college. Just soft piano and stock footage. Like I was a chapter that had already closed. I turned the volume down. Not off. Just low enough so I could still hear their lies. I watched as a reporter interviewed an old neighbor. She was quiet, kept to herself. Real classy lady. It's a shame. Shame? Yes, that's the word, isn't it? Not for the loss of me, but for the inconvenience of it. For the way I disappeared without handing over everything first. They thought I was gone, dead. Another tragic sea story swallowed by the tide. And part of me wanted to stay that way. Because if I was dead, I was finally free. From being their wallet, their fallback plan, their burden. But then, another part of me stirred. The part that remembered who I used to be. Before the dinners, where no one asked how I was. Before the house that echoed with absence. Before Cassandra smiled while I signed over shares, and Ethan called it streamlining the legacy. I stared at the screen, at the woman in pearls. She looked tired. She looked erased. And in that moment, I realized they hadn't just tried to kill me on that yacht. They'd been erasing me for years, slowly, carefully, with every false smile and every time they told me I was too emotional or not understanding the bigger picture. And now they'd finally succeeded. They'd declared me gone. But I was right here, breathing, watching. And I had just enough strength left to decide what came next. I turned the TV off. The silence in Miles's kitchen felt less like emptiness and more like a blank page. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. Let them think I drowned. Let them grieve with crocodile tears and rehearse their sound bites. They were about to find out what happens when a woman comes back from the dead, especially one they should have never pushed overboard. That afternoon, I found myself staring at the sea from Miles's back porch. The waves rolled in like soft, tired sighs. In their rhythm, memories came. Raymond. He used to say the sea sounded like time breathing. I never understood it fully. Until now. It was spring when he died. The tulips had just broken through the earth in our garden, stubborn and bright, unaware that death lingered by our doorstep. He passed on a quiet Tuesday morning holding my hand after 3 years of fighting cancer. He apologized in his final breath, not for dying, but for leaving me alone to carry the weight of everything. I buried him in the suit we got married in, and I kept his ring on a chain around my neck for months after. Then came the letter from Harvard. Ethan had been accepted. He was so proud. He ran down the stairs waving the envelope, his voice cracking with excitement. "Mom, look!" he shouted, glowing. I smiled and hugged him, but I felt the edges of fear creep in. Tuition, housing, books, flights. We didn't have it. The business Raymond and I built had slowed. Clients dropped off after his passing. I was holding on by the thinnest of threads, pretending it was all fine. That night, I went into our bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept what little jewelry I owned. Things with stories, things with soul. And there it was. My wedding ring. Gold band. Small diamond. Modest by any standard. But to me, it held everything. Every promise. Every memory. Every silent moment Raymond and I shared at midnight when Ethan was a baby and money was tight, but our faith was strong. I remember holding it in my palm, feeling the weight, not of gold, but of history. I drove to a pawn shop 2 towns over, didn't want anyone in our neighborhood to recognize me. The man behind the counter examined it, said it wasn't worth much. It's not about what it's worth, I told him. It's about what it'll do. He gave me just enough to cover Ethan's first semester tuition. I folded the bills carefully and tucked them into the pages of his acceptance letter. That night at dinner, I slid the envelope to him. He opened it. "Mom, where did this come from?" I shrugged, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "I figured it out." He hugged me, tight, called me his miracle. And I remember saying to him, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on his, "Ethan, I didn't do this because you asked. You didn't. I did this because I believe in you, and I trust you'll never forget where you came from." He promised. He looked me in the eye and promised. But time has a way of testing the promises made in youth, especially the ones made in comfort, not crisis. Now here I was, years later, declared dead by the very son I sold my wedding ring to send to Harvard. The irony was bitter. Not because I wanted the money back, but because he'd forgotten the cost. People think sacrifice is about the big gestures. It's not. It's about the quiet choices made in empty kitchens when no one's watching. It's about letting go of the only tangible piece of a man you loved so your child can have a future. That ring had been my anchor, and I gave it up willingly. But what I didn't know back then was that sometimes, when you give everything, you teach them how to take everything. I don't regret selling it. I never did. What I regret is believing that sacrifice guarantees memory. Because now, sitting on this weathered porch, in clothes not my own, with the world believing I was gone, all I could feel was how far he'd drifted, and how little he remembered of the woman who once held nothing but faith in her fists, and still chose to let go. The first time I walked by the house again, it was almost dusk. The sky wore that soft lavender hue that made everything seem like a painting. I stayed on the opposite sidewalk, hidden beneath the shadow of a sycamore tree. I didn't want to be seen. I wasn't even sure I wanted to see, but I did. The house sat at the top of the cul-de-sac like a queen on her throne, freshly painted white, new landscaping out front. The porch lights glowed a soft yellow. Inside, it was warm. I could see movement through the large bay windows. Shadows danced across the curtains. Laughter slipped out through the slightly ajar front door. The sound made me flinch. Cassandra had moved in quickly. Too quickly. Raymond and I spent 20 years building that home. We poured ourselves into it. Each brick was set with intention. Each room painted with love. Now, it looked like a showroom. Cassandra had replaced the hydrangeas I planted with sculpted boxwoods. The wind chime I hung from the porch was gone, replaced by one of those trendy metallic bells that made no sound unless the wind howled. There were children inside. Not mine. Not Ethan's either. At least not yet. Probably relatives of hers visiting. One of them ran past the window wearing a superhero cape, giggling. Cassandra followed behind, holding a tray of something warm. She was barefoot, comfortable. Ethan entered the room seconds later, wine glass in hand, smiling. He looked settled. He kissed her cheek. She laughed. It was the laugh I used to hear in commercials, the kind that seemed scripted. I stood there, gripping the strap of my handbag, as if that would keep me from disappearing completely. This used to be my kitchen. I remember baking Raymond's favorite peach cobbler on Sundays. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and butter. Ethan used to sit on the counter, legs swinging, waiting for the crust to brown. He'd sneak spoonfuls of filling when he thought I wasn't looking. I remember patching the wallpaper in the hallway after Ethan scraped it with his science fair volcano. I remember the dent in the stair rail where Raymond dropped a box of books, the tiny marks on the doorframe where we measured Ethan's height each year. Were they all gone now? Painted over, replaced, forgotten? I wanted to scream, not out of anger, but mourning. Because grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about watching the living forget you ever lived there. I walked slowly along the edge of the sidewalk, just enough to see the front door. It was blue now. It used to be red. Raymond painted it red the day we moved in. Said it meant welcome in some old tradition. That red doors were for homes with open hearts. Now, the heart was closed. And the door? It belonged to someone else. I didn't knock. Of course not. I stood there quietly, a ghost in my own life, watching a family gather in the house I gave everything for. A house that remembered my laughter, but no longer held space for my breath. I wasn't angry at Ethan. I wasn't even angry at Cassandra. Not in that moment. I was just untethered, like a kite whose string had been quietly cut in the wind. I turned to go, and as I did, a small voice inside whispered something I hadn't let myself say until that moment. This is no longer your home, Yvonne. It wasn't cruel. It was freeing. Because maybe, just maybe, home isn't a place where your photos hang, but where your soul is still seen. And tonight, standing outside that glowing house on the hill, I realized mine had not been seen in years. It had been nearly 2 decades since I last saw Olivia Grant. We used to volunteer together back when Raymond was still alive. She'd organize the neighborhood watch, and I'd bake lemon bars for the meetings. She was sharp, even then, always 2 steps ahead of everyone, with a voice that cut through noise like a blade through silk. I called her using an old number I wasn't even sure still worked. "Yvonne Merritt?" she asked, her voice cautious at first. "You're supposed to be dead." I let out a dry laugh. Guess I'm not very good at following scripts. An hour later, she was at Miles's cottage. She wore navy trousers, sensible shoes, and a lightweight blazer over a linen blouse. Her hair, once raven black, was now a striking silver bob. She hadn't aged. She'd only sharpened. We sat at Miles' kitchen table, the same place I'd sat in silence just days ago. She studied me over her glasses. "Tell me everything. No skipping parts. Especially the parts that hurt." And I did. I told her about the yacht, Cassandra's smile, Ethan's eyes avoiding mine. I told her about waking up in a stranger's home, the quiet cup of tea, and the news anchor reading my obituary like I was a chapter closed. I told her about watching them through the window, living in my house, breathing my air. When I finished, she didn't speak for a while. She just opened her notebook and clicked her pen 3 times, like a metronome for justice. Then, without ceremony, she said, "We're going to need access to every financial record, asset file, trust account, and medical report tied to your name. You think they— Oh, I don't think, she interrupted. I know. What came next was something I didn't expect, not at my age. We became investigators. Every morning, while Miles gardened and brewed his mint tea, Olivia and I pored over documents. She brought an old laptop, and we used it like a scalpel, carefully dissecting my life. First came the shock. My name had been removed from the deed of my primary residence 2 months before the accident. A new deed was filed electronically, with a shaky signature that wasn't mine. Then the trusts. 2 accounts were consolidated and transferred under the name Cass C. Merritt, Care Proxy, with accompanying documents declaring me mentally unfit to manage finances. I stared at the screen for a long time. Olivia leaned back, arms crossed. Did you ever sign a psychological assessment? Consent to a conservatorship? Never. I've never even been diagnosed with so much as seasonal depression. She nodded. Then what we have here is forgery, medical fraud, elder financial abuse, and, depending on how deep they went, possible attempted murder. My stomach turned. She clicked through another set of PDFs. This, she said, pointing at a scanned form, is a doctor's letter stating you're showing signs of early-stage dementia, signed by a psychiatrist out of Marin County. Ring a bell? I shook my head. We'll subpoena their files if needed. But, Yvonne, this letter? It's a template. I've seen it used in 2 other cases. It's fake. Or, at best, manipulated. The air went still. I wasn't crazy, I whispered. Olivia looked at me, steady. Of course not, but they needed you to be. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands trembling over my tea. Then she added quietly, "You're not alone anymore." In that moment, I remembered why I called her. Olivia had always fought for people who'd been told to stay quiet. And now she was fighting for me. Before she left that afternoon, she opened her planner and scribbled a list. At the top, she wrote, Operation, Resurrection. You've been erased, she said, standing. Time to write yourself back in. And for the first time since the ocean swallowed me whole, I felt something spark in my chest. Not rage, not grief, readiness. Olivia didn't suggest I sneak into my own former home. She simply said, if we're going to win, we need Cassandra's handwriting. Miles was worried. He offered to drive. I declined. It was just past 2 a.m. when I stood in the shadows across from the Merritt estate, my estate, cloaked in the kind of silence only betrayal leaves behind. Cassandra had installed motion-activated lights on the west patio, but she'd overlooked the narrow basement window I used to crawl through as a child when I locked myself out. I didn't crawl this time. I eased it open, lowered myself in, and landed softly on a storage bin labeled Holiday Decor, Donate. The house smelled different. Not bad, just foreign. Like rosemary and cold marble, like the absence of something once warm. I moved slowly through the kitchen, pausing when the floor creaked beneath the weight of memory. Upstairs, I heard the faint rhythm of breathing. Ethan's, heavy and regular. Cassandra, I imagined, breathed quieter, like a snake, always watching. My office was on the first floor. They'd turned it into a sleek study nook with minimalist furniture and a glowing wall lamp that looked like a halo over an empty chair. The drawers were mostly cleared out, save for tax returns, appliance manuals, and a few notebooks. Then I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a beige folder labeled Project Coral Final Draft. I sat down. It began with a mission statement, to transition all financial, real estate, and inheritance assets into long-term control under the merit line, preserving family wealth and eliminating emotionally compromised decision-makers. Emotionally compromised. The next page was a step-by-step timeline. Month 1. Introduce early retirement suggestion to Yvonne. Month 2. Medical concern raised with trusted physician. Month 3. Begin guardianship process under stress-induced cognitive decline. Month 4. Incident. I didn't need clarification on what incident meant. I'd lived it. And then came the spreadsheets. Trust accounts, shares, liquid assets, all color-coded with transfer statuses. Under each one, approved. Signed CM with a flourish. At the very back of the folder was a notarized signature page. Ethan's name, next to a note. Signatory confirms understanding that transfer of authority is in the best interest of family legacy. Agrees that incapacitation of original trustee, Y.M., renders all objections null. He had signed it. No notes. No hesitation. His signature was steady. Mine had been forged. His was deliberate. I sat there in the same chair I used to rock Ethan to sleep in when the nightmares were bad. I once told him that no storm could touch him as long as I was there. Now he'd signed me away like an expired insurance policy. The door creaked upstairs. I snapped the folder shut, slid it into my tote bag, and slipped out the side hallway just as Cassandra's voice echoed faintly from above. Ethan, did you hear something? My heart beat in my throat. I ducked back into the basement. Waited. 10 minutes. 15. Silence. Then I climbed out the same window, this time with something heavier than guilt. Proof. Back at Miles' cottage, Olivia was waiting with 2 mugs of coffee and a fire going. I handed her the folder. She read silently, lips tightening. Then she whispered, she drafted an entire corporate hostile takeover plan for her mother-in-law. She flipped through the pages. This is airtight planning, Yvonne, but it's also criminal conspiracy. And Ethan? She sighed. He may not have authored it, but his signature seals it. I stared at the fire. So what happens next? She smiled, not cruelly, but like someone who sees a puzzle falling into place. Now, she said, now we bring in the one thing they forgot you still have. I looked at her. What? Voice, she said, and truth, and timing. She placed the folder gently on the table like it was dynamite. We're not fighting back, she said. We're taking the stage. Some gifts aren't wrapped. They're returned. It had rained that morning, a soft, steady drizzle that made the pavement glisten like polished stone. I walked alone, a scarf covering my silver hair, a tote bag over my shoulder. Inside it was something Ethan hadn't seen in decades. The Merritt estate sat quiet under the overcast sky. No cars in the driveway. Cassandra likely had a spa appointment. And Ethan, well, men like him rarely stayed home when nothing profitable waited inside. I used the garden path. The one Raymond had laid stone by stone the summer Ethan turned 12. That same year, I stitched the handkerchief. I still remember it. It was the night after Ethan's first real fever broke. He had coughed for days. I had stayed up with him, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, humming old lullabies my mother once sang to me. When he finally slept, I sat by the fire and began stitching, his name in navy thread, surrounded by a ring of tiny pine trees. His favorite from the camping trip we never got to take. It wasn't store-bought, but it was mine. My hands, my thread, my love. And now it was time to give it back. I didn't need to break in this time. I had the code. Cassandra never changed it. too sure of herself. Or maybe too sure I was gone forever. 2013. The year Ethan got into Harvard. The door gave a soft click. I stepped inside. Everything was white. The entryway had once been painted robin's egg blue. Now it was sterile cream. The photos on the wall, once Ethan's childhood drawings, Raymond's fishing picture, our anniversary snapshot, all gone. In their place, abstract art in gold frames, expensive, empty. I walked through the hallway, my shoes silent on the marble, toward the living room. And there it was, the mantel. Once, it had displayed our wedding photo, Raymond in his army uniform, me in a borrowed dress with daisies in my hair. Ethan loved that photo, said it looked like a movie. Now, the frame was gone, replaced by a polished silver sculpture of two overlapping rings. Corporate. Hollow. I reached into my tote bag. The handkerchief was wrapped in soft tissue, still folded the way I kept it in my keepsake box for over 40 years. The navy embroidery had faded slightly, but the name Ethan was still bold, still mine. I unfolded it gently, smoothed it flat, and laid it on the mantel. No note, no explanation, just the name. Staring back at the room that had once belonged to him and me and Raymond. Then I looked up. A camera, discreet, blinking red. Good. I turned, walked to the center of the room, and paused where the sunlight used to hit Raymond's armchair in the mornings. That light was different now. Filtered. Cold. I didn't cry. I just whispered one sentence, meant for whoever would replay the footage. Everything you built here rests on what I gave. Freely, once. Then I turned and left. Back at Miles's cottage, Olivia was waiting by the kitchen window. She looked at me, then the empty tote. You placed it? I nodded. Right where our wedding photo used to be. She smiled. Perfect. You think they'll get it? She shrugged. She'll dismiss it. He'll pretend he doesn't remember, but it'll stay in his mind like a splinter. I sat down, poured myself some tea. It's not about guilt, I said. I know, Olivia replied. It's about memory and leaving a marker. She paused, like carving your initials into a tree you know they plan to cut down. I looked out the window, watching the rain pick up again. He was my son, I said softly. And now, Olivia said, placing a folder on the table, he's going to learn what happens when a mother remembers everything, including what was hers. I didn't sign the message. I didn't need to. By the time I hit send, I knew exactly where Ethan would be. In his sleek corner office overlooking the bay, his morning espresso untouched, his secretary filtering calls. The subject line was only 3 words. Still, very, alive. The body of the email? I remember who pushed me and who watched. You should remember too. Why no threats, no accusations, just truth. Dressed in silence. At the exact moment his phone buzzed with that email, I was at the Pier Cafe, sipping tea with Olivia. She watched me carefully, waiting for a flinch. I didn't give her one. You think he'll believe it's real? She asked. I stared into my cup. He'll believe it's possible, and that's enough. Back in the glass-walled fortress Ethan called headquarters, the email shattered his peace like a rock through stained glass. He read it twice, then again. By the 4th read, his hands were trembling. He didn't call the police. He didn't forward it to Cassandra. He sat there, screen glowing, as if the ghost of his mother had reached through the inbox and slapped him cold. 20 minutes later, Cassandra burst into the office, heels clacking, eyes wild. You look like hell, she said, tossing her clutch on the table. He didn't look up. There was an email, he muttered. She paused. From who? No name. He turned the screen to her. She read it. Once, then slammed the laptop shut. Someone's playing with you, she said sharply. It came from her old address, Ethan whispered, the one she used for the alumni board. Cassandra crossed her arms. That account was deactivated. Apparently not. They stood in silence. Then Cassandra spoke slowly. You deleted the footage, right? Ethan didn't answer. Ethan, you told me you deleted it. I thought I did, but now I'm not sure. Her voice lowered into something venomous. You thought? He stood, suddenly pale. You think I don't know what this is doing to me? He snapped. I see her in my sleep. I hear the splash. Shut up, Cassandra hissed. She looked at me. I said, shut up. And just like that, the perfect couple cracked. Cassandra stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Ethan stared at the dark screen, now blank, his own reflection faint in the glare. The ghost had entered the room. Meanwhile, I waited. Not for a reply. There wouldn't be one. Men like Ethan never write back. They react. They spiral. And Cassandra? She wouldn't stop at fear. She'd claw for control, which is exactly what I wanted. Olivia placed a folder on the table between us. Their foundation's financials, she said. All the donations, tax shelters, and fake charities Cassandra's name is on. I nodded. Good. You still want to go through with this? I stirred my tea. She made me a ghost, I said. Now I get to haunt her properly. The waves hit the dock with a soft rhythm. You think they'll fall apart? I smiled, faintly. They already are. Olivia didn't knock. She walked straight into the front office of Merritt and Dalton LLP, briefcase in hand, calm as morning tide. The receptionist looked up, ready to send her away, until Olivia placed a slim leather folder on the counter and said, For the board. Not you. Inside that folder was everything. Bank transfers, power of attorney forged with my name, a signature on medical documents labeling me mentally unstable. But the crown jewel was the recording. Cassandra rehearsing the push with Ethan on the yacht deck, a clipped, cruel voice saying, It has to look like an accident. You just need to look shocked, Ethan. Olivia didn't wait for permission. She walked out. Meanwhile, I was in the garden behind Miles's cottage, cutting lavender. Not because I needed it, but because it calmed my hands. I'd spent years putting trust in people who betrayed me. Now I was placing trust in paper, in ink, in a stranger's decency. That was the gamble. 2 days later, it paid off. The call came at 7:14 a.m. Is this Yvonne Merritt? A man's voice asked, gravel, thick, and gentle. Yes. My name is Gerald Renshaw. I serve on the Merritt Trust Board. I was your late husband's college roommate. I froze. I remember you, I said. I remember your wedding, he replied. I gave that terrible toast. We both chuckled, soft and sad. Then his voice shifted. I reviewed the materials Ms. Grant submitted. A pause. I believe you. I sat down slowly, knees suddenly unsure. There are procedures, he continued. Reviews, legal hurdles. But let me assure you, Mrs. Merritt, you are not alone in this. My eyes stung. I blinked them clear. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why now? He exhaled. Because when a man like Raymond trusts a woman with his name, his child, his fortune, and she's betrayed by both son and system, someone must speak for him. I gripped the phone harder. Thank you, I whispered. One more thing, he said. When the time comes, I'd like to be the one to hand them the letter. Later that evening, Olivia handed me a copy of the file she sent. Inside, printed screenshots of Cassandra's false mental health filings, annotations, timeline charts, legal interpretations. "This is airtight," she said. "They won't wiggle out." "But they'll try," I replied. She nodded. "Cassandra always thinks 10 moves ahead. But this time," she tapped the folder, "you're the one setting the board." I held the file in my lap, my fingers brushing the edges. This wasn't just about money. It was about the soul of a family, my husband's legacy, my place in it, and the truth they tried to bury with seawater. Not anymore. We met at Miles's cottage just before dusk. The sea outside was quiet, as if holding its breath. Olivia had brought records, sealed documents, and a small brass recorder. Arthur Bellamy arrived last, tall, slow-moving, with the faint smell of old ink and cedar. His eyes were sharp, despite the cane. Arthur had once been Raymond's business partner. Now, he was a key voice on the Merritt Trust. And more than that, he was one of the last people left who still remembered me as I was. Not just the woman in the papers labeled confused and unstable. We sat around the wooden table, a single lamp casting long shadows. No one spoke for a moment. Olivia broke the silence first. "We have everything. Enough to revoke Cassandra's influence, enough to challenge Ethan's claim to the estate, and enough to open the trust reevaluation clause." Arthur nodded slowly, hands folded atop his cane. "But you don't want a courtroom," he said, looking at me. "Do you, Yvonne?" I looked him in the eye. I want clarity. I want consequences. I want my name back." Arthur sighed. "Ethan was raised on your sacrifice, not just your money, Yvonne, your dignity. He has proven, publicly and privately, that he is unfit to carry Raymond's legacy. You know that. But I need to hear it from your lips." I didn't flinch. "He's not worthy of the Merritt name." Arthur's mouth pressed into a line. Then he turned to Olivia. "If we call a vote within the Trust Council, how fast?" 2 weeks, she said. "Quicker if you issue the motion yourself." He nodded once. "I will." I breathed in slow. "You think they'll fight?" Olivia almost laughed. "They'll fight like wild dogs, but they won't win." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch, setting it in the middle of the table. Inside was the recorder, the same one that had captured Cassandra's damning words. We let this speak for itself. Arthur reached out and pressed play. Cassandra's voice spilled into the room, sharp and deliberate. "Push her. Say it was sudden. I'll cry. We'll file the death certificate, and the trust will finally be ours." The room didn't move. When it ended, Arthur leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. "I used to play chess with Raymond on this coast," he murmured. "He once told me, if anyone ever tries to stain our name, let the sea remind them that even tides turn." He opened his eyes. "Let's turn the tide." We all sat for a beat longer. No toast, no handshake, just the quiet weight of decision. I stood first. Outside, the night had come, but inside that little home, I wasn't alone anymore. And this time, I had allies who remembered who I really was. Not a woman erased, not a relic of the past, but a Merritt in full. And that name was about to rise again. I wasn't there when the call came in, but Olivia was. She told me later, in quiet detail, how Ethan had just sat down to his usual late breakfast, black coffee, newspaper spread, like he still lived in a world untouched by consequence. Then his phone rang. Private number. He picked up without thinking. Mr. Merritt? A voice said, curt and professional. This is Julian Withers, Legal Affairs at Merritt and Langston Private Holdings. We're notifying you that, effective immediately, all trust-controlled accounts under your name have been frozen pending investigation. He blinked, confused. Sorry, what? There must be a mistake. The voice continued. All liquidity, assets, and access tied to the Merritt Legacy Trust are on hold, per Article 17B, following allegations of undue influence, beneficiary misconduct, and forged authorizations. Ethan stood up, knocking over the coffee. Cassandra, still in her robe, looked up from the couch. "What's happening?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer. He walked into the study and closed the door. "I'm sorry," he said into the phone, trying to regain control. "You said... forged what?" "Authorizations, Mr. Merritt. Signatures traced back to transactions involving psychiatric claims, medical declarations, and adjusted estate filings under your mother's name, Mrs. Yvonne Merritt." There was a pause. She's dead." The man cleared his throat. "No official death certificate has been verified, and your mother, as of yesterday, has submitted counterclaims through third-party representation." "Counterclaims?" Ethan whispered. "Indeed. And a full board review has been called. You'll receive notice." The line went dead. He stood there, phone still to his ear. Cassandra walked in. "Well, what was it?" He looked at her. Something in his face had shifted. Not anger, not panic. Something colder. "They froze everything," he said. Cassandra laughed. "That's impossible. They can't do that. We control it. We already..." He held up a hand. "We thought we did." She blinked, mouth open. I wrote everything. You signed it. We had the plan. Project Coral. That plan," he said slowly, "relied on her being gone." He sat down hard. "She's not gone, Cassandra." "What are you saying?" He looked at her like seeing her for the first time. Not with affection, but with distance. "She sent me an email." "What?" "She said, 'I remember who pushed me.'" Cassandra turned pale. That could be anyone. A threat. A prank. "No," he said. "She knew. The wording, the phrasing. My mother would never say it unless..." He trailed off. Silence wrapped the room. Outside, the sunlight poured through the glass, but inside, it felt like winter. "Where is she?" Cassandra asked. Voice smaller now. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the drawer, pulled out the marriage license. The amended trust copy. A copy of the psychiatric letter they'd forced through a sketchy clinic in Tampa. All of it. He spread it on the table. "She warned me, once, years ago," he murmured. "She said, 'One day, you'll think you've won, and then you'll hear a knock.'" Cassandra shook her head. "You're scaring me." "She's alive," he whispered, "and she's knocking." And just like that, the panic set in. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I used the key. The same brass key Raymond had made for me when we first moved into this house, decades ago. He said, "This home will always be yours, no matter who signs what." I slipped inside like a ghost they never expected. The hallway still smelled faintly of jasmine, the same scent I used to keep in the entryway. Someone had tried to erase me, but they hadn't erased the traces. Not entirely. The marble floor glistened. The portraits on the wall were rearranged, but not gone. Ethan and Cassandra had left just enough of me to make it seem respectful. Just enough to lie. I walked past the staircase, past the dining room where I had served Ethan his favorite pot roast every birthday until he was 23. Past the grand piano Cassandra insisted be placed in the parlor, even though she couldn't play a single note. And I sat down. Right there, in Raymond's old armchair. Leather, worn soft with age. It welcomed me like it remembered who truly belonged. I waited, and I didn't have to wait long. The front door slammed open. Voices, footsteps, laughter first, Cassandra's high-pitched tone. Then Ethan's voice, lowered, but tight. They were arguing again. I could hear it in the rhythm. They always argued when things didn't go as planned. They rounded the corner and stopped cold. Ethan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Cassandra dropped her purse. Her eyes widened. No, no, you're dead. I tilted my head, calm. Do I look dead to you, sweetheart? Cassandra took a step back. Her knees hit the edge of the hallway table. Ethan didn't move. He just stared, pale, lips parted. No longer the confident man who had stood on the deck of that yacht. Just a boy caught stealing from his mother's drawer. I smiled. Software controlled. Hello, Ethan, he swallowed. Mom. We need to talk, I said, my voice even. Sit down. They didn't move. I repeated, gesturing to the chairs opposite mine. Sit down. Ethan sat first, slowly, mechanically. Cassandra hesitated, then perched on the edge like she was ready to run. I studied them, not angrily, not vengefully, just with truth. You tried to drown me, I said. Cassandra flinched. You stole what wasn't yours, I continued. You lied, forged, manipulated, gaslit, and you did it all thinking I'd never return. I paused. I did. Cassandra's voice cracked. We thought you were gone. We thought... I know what you thought, I interrupted. You thought money made you invincible. You thought I was weak because I was kind. You thought grief would keep me buried. Ethan spoke then, barely audible. I panicked when I saw the report, when the account froze. It wasn't just the account, Ethan, I said. It was the trust, the legacy, your father's name, and you signed it away for convenience. He looked down. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of linen, placed it gently on the table. It was the handkerchief, the one with his name stitched in blue, back when he was 5 and had the flu. I had sat by his bedside every night, whispered lullabies. I believed in you once, I said. Cassandra looked at it like it was poison. Then I stood. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to scream. I'm here to reclaim what was never yours to take. Ethan whispered, Are you going to ruin us? I met his gaze. Number you already did that yourselves. I walked past them without another word. As I reached the door, I stopped. I'll see you at the reading, I said. And then I left. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that begged for words, but the kind that suffocated them. Ethan and Cassandra hadn't moved since I left the linen handkerchief on the table. Their world had cracked. Now, it was time for them to hear it shatter. I returned an hour later with Olivia by my side. She didn't need an introduction. Cassandra had heard of her. Everyone in our circle had. A former federal investigator who left the bureau after her husband passed, and who now handled only 2 types of cases. Those where justice was long overdue, and those involving old friends. Ethan opened his mouth when he saw her. Olivia raised her hand. Not yet. We didn't sit this time. Olivia placed her briefcase on the marble credenza, opened it, and took out a single black digital recorder. No files, no dramatics, just the truth. I walked to the center of the living room, where the light from the chandelier made every wrinkle in my face sharper, clearer. I didn't want to look kind. I wanted to look seen. You asked me earlier, I said slowly, if I came to ruin you. I turned toward them both. I didn't, but he did. And then I nodded to Olivia. She pressed play. The recording clicked. There was the clink of a spoon, a teacup being set down. Then my own voice, soft. I've read the document. I won't sign it. A pause. Then Ethan's voice, cold, calm, surgically precise. You're sure, Mom? Yes. Another pause. You know how easily accidents happen on boats, right? A misstep, slippery shoes, no witnesses, things like that. They're tragic. Click. Silence. Cassandra had gone pale. Her hand flew to her mouth. You recorded... I didn't, I said quietly. Olivia did. You remember our gardener, Miles? He handed her the recorder 2 hours before we left for the harbor. Cassandra turned to Ethan, horror dawning. You said it was your word against hers. You said... She wasn't supposed to make it back, Ethan whispered. No one was supposed to... He stopped. Too late. His voice had been heard. I took the recorder and placed it on the same table where I used to set out birthday cards and cocoa mugs, where Ethan had once made Mother's Day drawings with crooked crayons. I never needed to scream, I said. I just needed to wait. Ethan dropped into a chair, like the bones in his legs had gone soft. Cassandra paced. Her heels clicked across the tile, like tiny hammers. Is that admissible? She barked. This isn't court. No, Olivia said. It's not court. It's worse. It's family. And this family doesn't forget betrayal. I turned away from them and faced the portrait above the fireplace. Raymond. He looked stern, as always. But in that moment, I imagined something else in his eyes. Not pity, not judgment, just quiet approval. I turned back. You may still have the title. You may still live in this house. But as of tomorrow, I said, every door in the legacy you tried to hijack will be locked. Cassandra snapped. You don't get to decide that. Olivia tilted her head. You're right. She doesn't. Then she took out a sealed envelope, thick with embossed gold on the flap. But the Merritt Family Trust Board does. Ethan blinked. What? The audio, the forged signatures, the psychiatric fraud, the staged death. It was all submitted this morning, Olivia said, matter of fact. Arthur Bellamy signed off on it personally. I let the words settle. No one spoke, not until I leaned forward and whispered, almost kindly, Don't worry. I won't press charges. Their eyes flicked up in disbelief. I smiled. Because prison, I said gently, would be merciful. But living in the house of a man you tried to erase, knowing he left it all to the woman you called old and useless, that's justice. And with that, I picked up the recorder, placed it in my purse, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. They'd be hearing my voice long after I was gone. Ethan's mouth was still open, like he hadn't processed that I had walked away from him. Again. But this time, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I just let the quiet do what it does best. Press into the cracks of a guilty conscience and widen them until the whole foundation splits. I was back in my old room upstairs. The room no one had dared touch after I was gone. Funny, how absence finally made them respect space. I sat by the window Raymond had installed himself, looking out over the water, the same water Ethan had tried to bury me in. A knock came. It wasn't timid. It was desperate. Mom. Ethan's voice. I said nothing. Please, he tried again. Can we talk? I opened the door, just enough, not out of warmth, out of choice. He stepped in, slower than I'd ever seen him walk. He looked older than his 40 years. No longer the boy who tried too hard to impress his father. Just a man, stripped bare of excuses. I messed up, he began. No, I said. You planned. He flinched. Cassandra wasn't with him. She wouldn't be. She was likely on another call, trying to salvage what was left of the financial empire built on smoke and forged documents. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, the way he used to when he was sick as a child, and I read him bedtime stories. Are you going to the police? I shook my head. He looked up. Hope? Number suspicion. I'm not pressing charges, I said clearly. I'm not after blood. He exhaled. But Ethan, I continued, you're no longer part of this family. His breath caught. You're no longer a merit, not because you tried to kill me, but because you killed something far worse. His lips trembled. What do you mean? I stood. You killed trust. You killed legacy. You tried to bury the woman who gave you everything, including her silence, because you thought her quiet meant weakness. I handed him a document. Not legal, personal, a letter. From Raymond, dated 6 weeks before he passed. In it, he wrote, if I go first, protect Yvonne. And if Ethan ever chooses greed over blood, don't shield him. Let the truth stand. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. But mine stayed dry. He looked up again. So, that's it? That's everything. He rose. So I lose the house? The shares? You lose the name. He stumbled back like that hit harder than prison ever could. I stepped closer, not with anger, but finality. You can build a new name, I said softly, or live the rest of your life resenting the one you lost. He covered his face with his hands. I waited, just for a second. Then I turned. I'm not seeking revenge, I added. This isn't retribution. It's restoration. There's a difference. He didn't follow me as I left. Didn't call after me. Didn't fall to his knees or beg. He just sat there with the letter and the realization that the worst punishment wasn't death or jail. It was knowing your mother survived and still chose to leave you behind. The last thing I heard was the faint sound of the front door clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back, not because I wasn't tempted, but because looking back is for those who still wait for something to change. And I was done waiting. The clouds hung low over the coast that morning, gray, heavy with a kind of tired sadness. It matched the feeling that had been sitting in my chest since the day Ethan whispered, "Say hi to the sharks." I had one more stop before I left this chapter behind. A place Ethan wouldn't remember, but I did. It was a small community park in the older part of town. Nothing grand, just a rusted swing set, a broken seesaw, and a faded mural painted by local kids long before the Merritt name meant anything to us. And yet, that patch of grass had once held a world of joy. I sat on the same wooden bench I had over 30 years ago, on Ethan's 5th birthday. We had no money that year. Raymond was between jobs, and the electricity had been cut off twice that month. But I scraped together enough to make a homemade cake with jelly beans instead of candles. I remember Ethan's face when he saw it. The way he clapped his hands and shouted, "It's perfect, Mommy." And I'd promised him then, no matter how big the world gets, no matter how rich or poor we are, Mommy will be the first person you see every morning. I'll never disappear. I meant it. Every word. But life doesn't just pull people away. It peels them back, one layer at a time. And before you realize it, you're no longer the first person they see. You're the one they only remember when they need signatures. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo. That same birthday party. Ethan had jelly on his nose. I was laughing, mouth wide open, head thrown back. I looked happy. Not perfect, not polished, just real. I ran my thumb over the image. then folded it once, carefully, and placed it inside the old tree hollow nearby, the one Ethan used to call the secret mailbox. He would shove his drawings in there for the gnome mailman. He hadn't thought about that tree in decades, but I had. I whispered one last thing into the wind. I kept my promise for as long as you let me, Ethan. Now I'm keeping a promise to myself. I stood up, wiped the bench of the dew that had collected beneath me, and walked slowly back to the street. I wasn't crying, not because it didn't hurt. It did, but because grief wasn't in control anymore. I was. I no longer needed to be the first face Ethan saw. I no longer needed to be the backup plan, the emergency contact, or the wallet disguised as maternal love. I was Yvonne Merritt, a mother, not a shadow. And today, for the first time in decades, I chose myself. For the longest time, I couldn't bring myself to look at the child, not because he did anything wrong, but because of what he unknowingly represented. I had seen his photo on a mantelpiece once, months before the yacht, framed in sterling silver, perfectly lit. A baby wrapped in soft cashmere with a name so carefully chosen to sound prestigious, generational, solid. Elias Raymond Merritt. That middle name wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculation, a weapon. The story they told the world was polished. Cassandra and Ethan, the golden couple, finally blessed with a child. A rightful heir, a legacy reborn. But the truth had teeth. It started with a whisper between them. I wasn't meant to hear it. Back when I still stayed in the guest house sometimes, before the disdain turned into full-blown rejection, I heard them talking one night outside the veranda. I had stepped out to water the roses and froze as Cassandra's voice sliced through the air, low and sharp. "Your mother's not dying fast enough," she said. Ethan replied, "Then we need leverage. Something that puts us ahead of the trustees, no matter what she signs or doesn't." Cassandra didn't pause. "We need an heir." A week later, I noticed medical paperwork on the kitchen counter. Not hers, not Ethan's, a different name, an anonymous profile number. Then came the changes. Frequent phone calls, appointments with specialists, legal consultations with family lawyers I didn't recognize. And then, just like that, there was a baby announcement. But there had been no pregnancy, no swollen ankles, no cravings, no glow. Just a child, appearing like a pawn moved onto the board at the exact right moment. Later, I'd learned the full extent from Olivia, who traced the records once she began digging. Cassandra had used a surrogacy agency under a shell name. The embryo had been created through IVF, carefully selected for bloodline continuity, and implanted in a woman flown in from Ohio. The woman had signed a watertight NDA. The baby had been part of a legal strategy designed to cement Cassandra and Ethan as active contributors to the family legacy. A child as proof of stability, of permanence, of dynastic duty. But what haunted me wasn't the manipulation. It was the realization that they had brought a soul into this world not out of love, but to justify a crime. After I confronted Olivia with everything, she asked gently, "What will you do about the child?" I couldn't answer then. I didn't know. How do you reconcile the innocence of a baby with the ruthless agenda of those who created him? But today, standing in front of that same framed photo, I felt the answer rise inside me like tidewater. You separate the child from the sin. You give him a name untainted by greed. You protect him from the story his parents tried to force onto him. And above all, you never let him become another tool. When Ethan had whispered, Say hi to the sharks? I believed I was leaving behind everything. But I wasn't. Not entirely. There was still one thread worth saving. Not because he could fix what they broke, but because he deserved to know he was never the problem. He was the proof that even in the midst of rot, something real could still take root. Not a legacy, not a title, just a boy. One who would grow up and one day ask questions. And when that day came, I wanted to be the one who had the courage to tell him the truth, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because every story deserves a course correction, even the ones written in blood and betrayal, especially those. I didn't take back the fortune. I didn't keep the estate, the cars, the portfolio, or the sprawling house filled with curated furniture I never picked out. I left it all behind, not as an act of surrender, but as a declaration. I chose peace. The cottage I found sat quietly along the windswept coastline just 30 minutes from where Miles lived. It wasn't grand, just 2 bedrooms, white shutters, and a wraparound porch facing the ocean. When I signed the papers, the real estate agent looked at me as if I was settling for less. But to me, it was more than enough. It had a chipped blue mailbox that creaked when opened, a garden already overgrown with rosemary and lavender, a front step worn down by someone else's years. I liked that. I liked the evidence of life. The first morning there, I brewed tea in a ceramic pot I found at a local thrift shop. Earl Grey with a hint of vanilla. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, sat on the porch swing, and watched the horizon blur into the sky. No one called, and for the first time in a very long time, that silence didn't ache. It soothed. I unpacked slowly. There wasn't much, just a few boxes. I had left behind the grand portraits, the antiques, the silver-framed awards Ethan used to brag about. What I kept fit in the trunk of my car, a few cookbooks, Raymond's favorite fountain pen, a cracked photo of Ethan as a toddler with frosting on his nose, and a worn, leather-bound album filled with years of memories, some too heavy to look at just yet. I placed that album by the window, where the light hit softly in the afternoons. It didn't deserve to be tucked away. It had held everything once. In the evenings, I wrote. Not emails, not reports, just thoughts, reflections, small fragments of what had been, and what might still come. Sometimes I copied poetry I once loved, but had forgotten in the blur of trying to be everything for everyone. To love and be silent is a kind of power, I wrote one night. I didn't need to be loud anymore, or visible, or needed. I only needed to be. Miles visited every Sunday. He brought groceries I didn't ask for and stories I didn't know I needed. He never pried, never asked about Ethan or the aftermath. He simply sat beside me with a second cup of tea and let the quiet hold us both. One afternoon, he brought a tiny calligraphy set and said, "I thought you'd enjoy writing beauty for yourself now." It made me laugh. But the next day I opened it. My first attempt was clumsy, but my second felt like a breath exhaled fully. I began every morning after that with ink and intention. A phrase here, a line there, not for display, just for the soul. The cottage began to reflect me, not who I had been expected to be, but who I had quietly become over years of surviving. No longer Mrs. Merritt, not Raymond's widow, not Ethan's mother, just Yvonne, a woman who had walked through fire and learned to sit by the sea without bitterness, a woman who no longer carried the weight of a name that had demanded too much and given too little in return. I received a letter once, months later, no return address. Inside, a photo of Elias, the baby. He had grown. Wide eyes, the same tilt of the chin Ethan had at that age, scribbled beneath in block letters. He likes the ocean. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, placed the photo in the album by the window, and whispered, "Good." Sometimes healing doesn't arrive in grand moments. Sometimes it comes quietly, through ink on parchment, through lavender growing wild, through the simple decision to make tea in the morning without waiting for anyone to ask for it. I hadn't lost everything. I had let go of what was never mine to begin with. And in doing so, I had finally found something precious. Not revenge, not justice, just peace. It came in a plain white envelope, no name on the front. Just my address written in blocky, almost childlike handwriting, as if someone had been careful not to be recognized. Inside was a folded piece of thick paper and a note. Short. Software. "Miss Yvonne, I thought you might want to see what Elias made in art time. He asked me to send it. Warmly, Carol." Carol. Of course. She had always been gentle, with hands that never dropped a plate or raised a voice. She was the one who had tucked Ethan into bed when I was still working nights at the diner. And now, it seemed, she was doing the same for his child. I unfolded the paper. It was a crayon portrait, all swirls and soft colors, messy in the way only children could create, but unmistakably heartfelt. At the center was a woman, not young, not fragile, silver gray hair, a long navy blue cardigan, a soft smile, and something about the eyes. Wide, warm, still. The background was ocean blue, a chair behind her, a window, a cup on the table. He had drawn me. I held the drawing for a moment, then noticed the title scribbled at the bottom in orange crayon, in all caps, "The Quiet Lady Who Hugged Me." Below that, a sentence, clearly dictated by a child and written by an adult hand. She had the calmest heart. I felt like I didn't need to talk, just sit. I stared at it, not with tears, but with something deeper, something that ached and healed at the same time. Elias remembered. He remembered that one afternoon on the porch, when Miles brought him by, pretending it was for a quick drop-off, and how the boy had wandered into my arms like he belonged there. No fuss, no fear, just quiet acceptance. I hadn't spoken much that day, just held him while he looked around the cottage, his small fingers playing with the tassels of my shawl. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't need to. Children know who's safe. They don't need titles, or bloodlines, or explanations. They feel truth. And sometimes, that's enough. I placed the drawing beside my calligraphy set, careful not to smudge the corners. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm light across the table. In the silence, I imagined him, coloring, choosing each crayon with deep, serious thought, as if it mattered. Because to him, it did. A child doesn't draw what doesn't matter. I poured myself a cup of tea. Jasmine and mint today. Let the warmth settle in my palms. No reply was needed. Carol knew. If she had sent it, it meant she understood the risk, and still did it. There was no return address, no digital trail, just a moment of shared stillness passed from one soul to another. Some part of me wanted to respond, to say thank you, to send back something, but I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because the moment didn't need to be disturbed. The boy would grow. Perhaps he'd forget the details of that hug, the feel of my arms, the scent of lavender in my sweater. But something would remain. A softness, a shape in his memory that reminded him not everyone who disappears stops loving you. Some leave because they must, Because staying would mean becoming something they're not. Because silence, sometimes, is the last thread of dignity we hold on to when everything else has been taken. I ran my fingers over the child's handwriting one last time. The calmest heart. I had never been described that way before. Not in business, not in marriage, not even as a mother. But maybe, just maybe, in that brief moment, I had become the woman I was meant to be. Not for my son, or my late husband, or the legacy of the Merritt name, but for a child who had been born into a storm he didn't choose, and who, just for one afternoon, had found the eye of that storm in my lap. I folded the drawing back up, placed it in a wooden box beneath my bed, with a few letters from Raymond and my mother's recipe cards. Things I wouldn't display, but couldn't let go of either. Not everything needs to be spoken. Some love survives best in quiet places, like a drawing tucked inside an envelope, like a hug remembered without a name, like a woman watching from afar, sipping tea, whispering a blessing the wind will carry, whether anyone hears it or not. I didn't sink, I didn't drown, and I didn't scream. When they shoved me off that yacht, they thought the ocean would swallow me whole, just as they had tried to erase my presence from their lives. But I rose, not out of rage, not for vengeance. I rose for something quieter, firmer, older, dignity. I once believed my role in life was to be the glue, the peacekeeper, the unshakable foundation beneath a family too busy building their empires to notice they were standing on my back. I thought love meant endurance, that silence was the price of belonging, that being needed was the same as being cherished. I was wrong. I have been a wife. I have been a mother. I have been the steady shoreline against generations of storms. And now I am simply me. That, I've learned, is enough. You might wonder why I didn't press charges, why I didn't go to the police, why I didn't take them to court and tear their names from the pages of every trust document, why I didn't burn it all down. Because sometimes the most powerful statement isn't destruction, it's release. I released the weight. I let go of the inheritance. I unhooked myself from the legacy of control, expectations, silence. I didn't destroy the house. I simply walked out the front door and took the key with me. People asked me what I call what I did. Justice? Number justice implies retribution. I call it reclamation. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it to remember me. I no longer have a mansion, or a name that unlocks boardrooms, or children who parade me as a figurehead at charity galas. I have tea in the morning. I have paintbrushes I haven't touched in decades, now dipped in color again. I have handwritten letters from women like you. Yes, you. Telling me your daughter did the same, that your son disappeared after the wedding, that your grandchildren don't know your face, that you kept silent until silence turned into stone inside your throat. Well, hear this. You're allowed to stop carrying people who never once asked how your back felt. You're allowed to speak. And more importantly, you're allowed to leave. Because being a mother is not the same as being a mat. I get it now. I used to think silence was strength. Now I know strength is speaking softly but firmly. It's saying, no, I'm done. It's setting the teacup down and never picking it up again when the conversation is cruel. It's not slamming the door, but closing it and locking it from your side. It's choosing yourself after decades of being told that was selfish. And if my story stirs something inside you, if you too were thrown overboard, if your name was erased from the family group chat, if your holiday seat was replaced by someone else's ambition, I want you to know this. You're not crazy. You're not bitter. You're not overreacting. You're awakening. You are the calmest storm they never saw coming. And before I close this chapter, let me ask, do you think I was wrong? Tell me where you would have stood. Would you have waited for the rescue, begged for a lifeboat? Or would you have learned to swim? If you've ever been pushed off your family's yacht, literally or metaphorically, drop a comment. Let the world know you didn't sink either. Let someone else see your voice and realize they're not alone. Because you're not. We're a quiet army. We don't shout. We don't plot. We just rise. And when the tide comes in next time, we'll be standing at the shoreline, not waiting, but watching, calm, whole, free.